Well, Kamal, it's difficult for Starmer, isn't it? Even his own supporters on the conference floor in Liverpool won't support him on winter fuel. We've got unions and members now voting against that cut. OK, it's not binding on the Prime Minister, but my goodness, it's damaging.
It's like Japanese knotweed, Camilla. He simply cannot kill this story, and freebies are back. He's been questioned through a series of interviews this morning about all the tickets he got, Taylor Swift, many football matches, and he's refusing to apologise. And we'll be going through his explanation about why he just had to use his mate's £18 million penthouse. And Camilla, Phillip Schofield is on the comeback trail, and he's a former colleague of yours.
He is too. I worked with him at This Morning. He was unceremoniously dumped by ITV.
No ceremony there, no.
And indeed the whole of the celebrity world for having this consensual relationship with a younger man on set. Yes, I think we should discuss whether Scof, as he's known, should be uncancelled.
And what is the route to that? Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed.
And me, Camilla Tominey.
So as you say, Camilla, Labour, final day of Labour Party conference today, the big vote, the main vote, which the party managers had pushed to the last moment. Their leader, Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, was frankly probably quite glad to be in New York for the United Nations meeting there. So it was a day when the Prime Minister wasn't in the UK. It was the final event of Labour Party conference before they start dismantling all that kit up in Liverpool, but hugely embarrassing. The members, the Labour members, the unions came together to defeat the government on the winter fuel allowance cut. Now, the policy won't change unless the government decides to change it, but it is still a bloody nose. What was interesting was that Sharon Graham, she is the General Secretary of Unite Union, which represents which represents many thousands, particularly of public sector workers. Her union and another union proposed the end or the U-turn on the winter fuel allowance, but after we were talking yesterday about Keir Starmer and his inability to get the crowd going, to really understand where he's coming from, to have real passion, let's just hear a bit of Sharon Graham. I tell you one thing she's not lacking, and that's passion.
The nation wants food, work and homes. It wants a high and rising standard of living. Security for all against a rainy day. Friends, that's a quote from the 1945 Labour Manifesto, written in the shadow of death, destruction and debt caused by years of war. It was a manifesto of hope, written at a time when our debt to GDP was 270%, nearly 3 times higher than it is now. No mention of cuts, no mention of austerity, and certainly no mention of making everyday people pay. Labour knew then that to make Britain more equal, they had to act and think differently. They knew to make it count and to make a real difference, Labour could not simply be better managers, they had to make lasting change. They promised jobs, they promised homes, and they built a national health service on the back of crisis. There wasn't a story of tightening belts or making some of the poorest in our society pay. Friends, people simply do not understand. I do not understand how our new Labour government can cut the winter fuel allowance for pensioners and leave the super rich untouched. This is not what people voted for. Let everyday people know we are on their side. Let's put our arms around the working class and make lasting change. Solidarity, I move.
I mean, I say I love...
She's had her Weetabix,
She's
I
had
would
a
say.
Weetabix. I think she's had several portions. I say I love Sharon Graham. Look, people might find me saying that quite surprising because obviously she's a union leader, but you've got to admire her gusto and her commitment to what she regards to be true Labour values, which is where I think she thinks Keir Starmer and his party have come unstuck. We've been discussing this all week, haven't we, in Liverpool and now back in London. And we can't quite get our heads around why they have decided to cut this 300 quid to pensioners. My view on it over the weekend was that it was targeted at boomers. It was targeted at, I suppose, people they would regard to be wealthy Tories. Perhaps even it was targeted at Telegraph readers. Shock, horror, Kamal. What's happened, though, is if you've got 10 million out of 12 million pensioners not able to now claim this allowance, that you're also affecting people massively on the cusp of the pension credit breadline to people who I think are on about 13 grand a year being affected by this. And of course you get obvious tales of woe. You get to hear about nurses, former nurses and former teachers and people who are really going to struggle because they've lost this 300 quid, not least, I mean, the timing politically, come on. Not least when we all know that the price cap has gone back up. We've all received
For energy,
that.
the energy bills are going up.
We've all received that letter. I got mine last week. Oh, by the way, your energy bills are going up again. Oh, goodness me. So it's politically wrong-headed. And every time I spoke to a Labour minister over the weekend, as you did, and I was saying to them, come on. I mean, because they must innately, if they are proper lefties, as I would describe them, be completely aligned with Sharon Graham's thinking. And yet they're pretending they're not. But how on earth, as a Labour MP, let alone a cabinet minister, do you go out on the doorstep and sell this to your voters? We heard from John and Lillian, our producers on the Daily Tea, did that Vox Pop in Liverpool, one, the shopping centre yesterday. And you've just got ordinary members of the public expressing total incredulity. And on it goes.
It's absolutely baffling because it is now £1.5 billion, which is what Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has said will be saved by cutting this fuel allowance for many millions of people. It is a lot of money, of course, but in the whole of public spending, it's absolutely tiny. Why pay such a high political price for such a small amount of money? I really don't understand that. The second point as well is that today the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development is a big think tank that represents the richest nations in the world, has said that the UK economy is likely to grow next year much faster than was initially forecast. When the economy grows faster, that means that tax receipts for the government grow. £1.5 billion becomes a rounding error. It seems most odd. And I must admit, Camilla, speaking to everybody, the why. I think you're right that it's around the intergenerational fairness. Pensioners are not in the same position they were 20 years ago. They are more wealthy at the very top end. I think that was one thing was in their mind. And the second thing, it looks tough. We're going to take the tough decisions. But what a target, what a group of people to decide you would act tough on.
But that's the point, isn't it? That I think Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, was trying to justify all of this doom and gloom around the 22 billion black hole by making 2 points. The legacy we've inherited is so bad, we're having to do something completely anti-Labour and take on even pensioners. Think of the poor pensioners. Maybe they actually thought that people would look at this policy and blame the Tories for it, which is catastrophic mistake number one. And then second of all, I think it's also about Reeves, as you have been saying throughout our time together in Liverpool, channeling her inner Brown, doing this whole hair shirt thing, you know, following the global financial crisis. They've turned that into following 14 years of Tory failure. We have got to make the tough decisions. And we had a lot, didn't we, in both speeches from hers and Starmer's about no more performative politics. We've got to be honest with the public, notwithstanding Freebiegate, which we'll get onto in just a minute. So they're almost doing this to try and prove to the public that they're not sort of they're not showman politicians, that they're real politicians making these tough choices. But it doesn't make it any less idiotic. And hasn't the Treasury just been handed this £10 billion windfall it wasn't expecting? And I think the Pensions Minister, the former Pensions Minister, Ros Altman, has made the point, well, you've got 10 billion more than you had accounted for, even though everything is meant to be even though everything is meant to be fully costed in Rachel Reeves's language. So you could just U-turn on this, but can they U-turn, Kamal? I don't know.
I don't think they can. I think politically now they've made their grave and they're going to have to lie in it. If you look at the way the economy is going, there was no need to make this decision so quickly, without thought and without context. They've taken the wrong bits of the 1997 playbook. We were talking about this with Ben yesterday, weren't we?
Ben
Riley-Smith, our political editor. And he had obviously picked up from Labour, having a fight with the unions, with the Sharon Grahams of this world, was kind of good. It showed that Labour were on the side of, hard-working families that don't really like the unions very much. But that was in 1997 when Tony Blair knew that a fight with the unions was fine for New Labour because the public supported New Labour. They didn't support the unions. On this instance, the public support where the unions are.
Yes.
They don't support winter fuel allowance cut. And so they're fighting not just the unions. Internally, this seems so wrong-headed why no one's understood this and advised Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves about this. The unions are on the public side. And so fighting the unions is you fighting the public by proxy. And that was completely different from 1997. You're picking the wrong fight.
Another further point on that, Kamal, that I've just been thinking about, just reflecting on the conversations I had with union officials in Liverpool. It's surprising, but I do have them. What I witnessed was that, OK, I think there's universal condemnation of taking on pensioners because people just don't like policies that adversely affect the most vulnerable members of our society. Leave the children and the pensioners alone is the general attitude, even though Labour thinks that this idea of taking from the old and giving to the young is somehow popular with the youth. I'm not sure it is. Then we've got the unions at odd increasingly, and I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this the more they push their green agenda.
The government does.
The government, because we've got Ed Miliband going fully Greta Thunberg on net zero, talking about creating these mythical 650,000 green jobs and banging on about shutting down North Sea oil and gas. The unions, quite rightly, are worried that this approach, this taking away jobs from people working in utilities effectively is going to be a sort of rerun of what Thatcher did to the miners. And it's even more curious because it's happening under a Labour government. So I get why Labour are supporting the Miliband-esque approach because they're very worried that their younger progressive voters are going to flock to the Greens if they don't honour their net zero commitments. But at the same time, they are alienating not just the unions but the older, what I would regard as old Labour voters who would be aligned with the position of preserving jobs, preserving productivity. But here's the irony. They are also alienating the old Labour voters who switched to the Tories under Boris Johnson and then possibly migrated to Reform. So Labour's got a massive problem, I think, coming up the hills ahead, in that quite a lot of Labour voters, if they think this is the direction of travel, are going to increasingly look towards Nigel Farage because they don't think that the Tories represent good old-fashioned working-class values. They might see it in Farage in the same way that people in Rust Belt America are seeing it in J.D. Vance, because, again, we discussed this previously on the Daily Tea. He's doing that thing of combining social conservatism with slight Corbynomic type policies when it comes to workers' rights, the minimum wage, and protecting basically local jobs for local people.
This is the new, I think this is the new politics.
I mean, they don't like protectionism, but what they're saying is British jobs for British workers. Don't close down factories. Don't close down North Sea oil.
I think J.D. Vance does support some protectionism for markets.
No,
American
I'm saying
jobs.
He does protect.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the unions here might not like the idea of that American-style protectionism, but they do like the idea. Weirdly, nobody really on left and right, this is where the circle of ideology meets. You get righties banging on about the importance of productivity and keeping our steelworks and factories open because they regret that period of Thatcherism. They don't like the fact. It's horrible for righties who supported Thatcher, who have a heart, to look at mining communities in Wales and see what's happened to them now. These are the very same people who are talking about shops being boarded up and seaside towns being abandoned. And you trace it back, and it does trace it back to the 80s. So they are as aligned, weirdly, with some of these old school Labour voters and union types than anyone might have you believe. In fact, the pensioners it actually is affecting the most, obviously isn't the ones on pension credit, it's the ones on the cusp of pension credit, people earning even as little a year in their pension as 13, 14 grand. That's the people who are being affected. And actually on Good Morning Britain, Susanna Reid grilled Keir Starmer particularly about those sorts of Labour voters, and he found himself in quite a pickle trying to answer.
Because she does not feel she's going to be able to put the heating on. She voted for you, but she feels let down. Would you like to take this opportunity to say sorry to pensioners like Chrissy?
Well, I am really concerned that we've been put in this position. When you inherit an economy with £22 billion missing, it is a really difficult set of choices. But what I don't want to do is to allow the economy to run out of control. What I want to make sure is that every single pensioner, there is that increase through the triple lock each and every year, £460 next year because of the triple lock. We have to take that action.
There is a connection between the reform cell and some of where the unions are, definitely. And we've discussed this, haven't we? I think the smart thing to do on the right is to understand that sort of confluence of interests now, that people want. What Sharon was saying there, some of that would be agreed with by many on the right of the spectrum. Now, one big solution that won't be is the notion of wealth tax, because that's somewhere where there is a complete divide. What Sharon Graham thinks there should be is a wealth tax on people to raise more money. Now, lots of people will disagree with that. But that new future and that net zero, again, it's where the public is. The public want action on climate change. They don't believe that the journey to net zero, with all the costs piled up front for people now, is the way to achieve it. And again, the government is picking a fight, not just with the right and blaming the Tories for lots and lots of things, not just the unions and the left and saying they're out of touch and we have to plough on and plough forward, but with the public, because on winter fuel allowance, on net zero, the public is not with the government.
I mean, this is hardly a surprise, Kamal, but when we asked Telegraph readers what they thought of the cut to the winter fuel allowance, the poll results are fairly definitive, should we put it that way? Who supports it? Yes, 9%. Who doesn't? 91%. The sample is not insignificant, Kamal. 367,000 people responded to that, and 9 out of 10 said it was a bad idea.
They have misjudged the mood on this issue in such spectacular fashion. They should know their Labour history. Gordon Brown nearly came a cropper on a 75 pence increase in pensions in 1998, which is why the annual fuel allowance came in, because he had to save his own reputation. They have ignored that, and they have done something which appears to the public to be an attack on pensioners. I cannot believe 80 days into this government that this is where they imagined they would get to.
Well, it's not just winter fuel allowance that is causing problems for Keir Starmer. We've got Donergate rumbling on, Kamal.
More knotweed. They can't kill these stories, can they, Camilla? Which is one of the problems. They can't get a grip of what is called the narrative. It's a horrible sort of in-beltway word, but they cannot get a grip of these stories, which means that this is what the public are hearing their government is doing.
But you will not believe the extraordinary excuse that Keir Starmer has come out with to justify the use of Lord Alli's £18 million apartment. We'll be discussing that next.
Well, goodness me, Keir Starmer, as soon as he tried to deal with the winter fuel allowance fiasco at his doorstep, he was then asked about his own freebies. Obviously, we've spoken about this many times, Camilla. Taylor Swift tickets, endless visits to his favourite Arsenal, but also many, many other football matches. He's the most freebie gift-hungry leader I think we've possibly ever had. So he was also grilled on that. But let's just hear his answer to Nick Robinson on BBC's Today programme, who asked him to account for one particular donation, accommodation. Never really made clear in his actual register of members' interests what that meant. It was then revealed that it actually was the use of Lord Alli's penthouse apartment in central London, worth a cool £18 million. Nick Robinson asked him what was his defence for the people who said you shouldn't be taking gifts of that type.
At the beginning of the election, which we didn't know when it was going to be called, my boy, 16, was in the middle of his GCSEs. I made him a promise that he would be able to get to his school, do his exams without being disturbed. We had lots of journalists outside our house where we lived. Now, I'm not complaining about that, that's fine. But if you're a 16-year-old trying to do your GCSEs and it's your one chance in life, I promised him we would move somewhere, we'd get out of that house and go somewhere where he could be peacefully studying. Somebody then offered me accommodation where we could do that, and I took it up, and it was the right thing to do for my boy. It didn't cost the taxpayer a penny.
That somebody was Lord Alli, wasn't it?
Yes, of course, but my primary concern wasn't about influencing government. It was making sure that my boy could do his GCSEs without having to wade through loads of journalists outside the house, which may not trouble you and me, but for my 13-year-old girl and my 16-year-old boy, does make life more difficult.
No, you obviously look. You clearly feel passionately about this. I really do. You feel strongly.
Hang on a minute. You can't have it both ways, Keir Starmer. On the one hand, he and Lady Starmer have made it very clear that they do not want their children, completely understandably, by the way, to be dragged into the public view at all. They don't want to name the children. They don't want to have the children photographed. We didn't, when they entered Downing Street, see the children at all. And that I completely respect as a mother. But if you want to keep your children completely out of it, you can't then use them as an excuse to defend yourself in a tough line of questioning. I mean, I find that extraordinary.
I think it's really thin gruel from Keir Starmer. And then just to explain to you, the way he talks about it, you might imagine some of those old-fashioned images that we're also used to of people sticking cameras in your face and shouting through the letterbox as if he was being stalked by journalists outside his house, and every time he came out, he would be besieged. Now, Camilla, I think, well, I've certainly done many of these things. Actually, what happens is a set of journalists and a couple of photographers stand pretty sort of respectfully outside the house to get a morning shot of him going into his car, and you might get one or two comments and then you leave. And there's a sort of agreement. There's a tacit agreement between the media, which is broadcast as well as print media, and the opposition leader's office, as it then was. He used this penthouse through the period of the actual campaign. It is not this sort of brutal cameras in the face type situation. No. It's all quite calm. He lived, before the election, and he moved into number 10. He lives in a large house in North London, and the idea for the public that somehow, look, no one wants his son to be distressed by things. No one wants that. No one wants anyone's children not to be supported through GCSEs. But the idea that the only solution to his son possibly bumping into a pretty respectful journalist outside the gate on his way to school or studies or whatever it was to use one of the Labour Party's biggest donors, Lord Alli's £18 million penthouse in Covent Garden,
really
central
quiet.
London.
Covent Garden, when you're studying for your GCSEs.
And also, Camilla, nowhere near his house or his friends. Going to Covent Garden is quite a trip. It's not as if you couldn't have found a quiet friend's house. Ed Miliband lives up the road from him.
Here's an idea. Couldn't you have found a library?
Ed Miliband lives up the road. He's got a spare room. He's got his kitchen. He's got his double kitchens.
Second kitchen.
Yeah, he's got his supper kitchen. I'm sure he's got a spare room he could have used. He could have had a solution to that problem, because we don't, look, I don't want to make a row about his 16-year-old son.
Well, he's brought his 16-year-old son into it.
Exactly. But you don't have to use a donor's 18 million. This is it, Camilla. the tin ear to politics is a popularity contest. In the end, okay, you can say, I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing the right thing. But if you lose the popularity contest, you lose the election. Okay? In the end, you have to have a reckoning with the public. If you do everything and say, well, no, I'm sticking to that because that's what I think is the right thing to do for my 16-year-old son, and the whole of the public is looking at that and saying, hang on a minute, chum, you came from a 2-earning family household, pretty wealthy in comparison with nearly everybody in the country. You live in a very large house in a very smart piece of London. You've got lots and lots of very, very smart friends who I'm sure have got a spare bedroom that's quite quiet at the back of the house. They all live quite near you.
Yeah.
Use one of those. You don't need to do.
No.
Why haven't you seen? Thanks so much, Wahid, for that offer. It's really kind of you, but I don't think that's the reason.
Well, also, how does he think that single mothers in 2-bedroom flats in a tower block get their kids to study for their GCSEs? I mean, they're doing their work on the kitchen table.
He seems so miles away,
while mum's
doesn't
cooking on the stove
Exactly.
next door.
Yeah.
The other thing is, by the way, sorry, I'm going to bring this up because somebody...
No need to apologise, Camilla, to me.
No, because somebody needs to stand up for all children in all this, and I include private school children, because I'm really sorry if his son's GCSEs have been slightly disturbed by Rishi Sunak's, admittedly, preposterous decision to hold an early election on May the 22nd through to July the 5th. And we're all sorry for that, not least Rishi Sunak and all of the MPs that lost their seats. But could he spare a thought for the thousands of children whose GCSEs are going to be disrupted in January when Labour decides to put VAT on school fees and their parents are probably going to have to withdraw them from their classes and from the friends and the schools that they love? No thought for that, of course, because apparently Labour only has sympathy for the mental health of state school children only. So this is also, this is looking, facing in both directions. Oh, I find it.
We're almost blowing up here. Let's go to you, because you've made some points that I think are well worth kind of considering for us, Camilla. Malcolm MacDonald has written into us, and he said Keir Starmer won't use private health. Actually, he's making the similar argument to you, Camilla, in a way, or a connected argument. Keir Starmer won't use private health to care for his family, but will accept £20,000 to let his son study for exams.
Good
How
point.
stupid does Starmer think we are? To use his son as an excuse is cowardly and contemptuous.
Mr. MacDonald there referring to Keir Starmer saying during one of the TV debates that he would rather wait on the NHS than use private to
I'd forgotten that.
fast-track
Yes,
a loved
good
one.
point.
David Leach says, I think you are quite wealthy enough, Prime Minister, to have solved this problem for your son from your own extensive resources. You've accepted a gift from a party that very likely expects something in return. Standards in public office are there for a reason, and one would expect the Prime Minister to be setting an example and not putting personal convenience before your duty to the country. What a hypocrite you are. No wonder your ministers don't get it. What an example you've set.
And then just one more. Sandra Simpson says, is this the only person doing exams and having to study with stuff going on round him? What sense of entitlement? There are children studying and being carers and getting on with it.
Really good point.
He is making himself appear distant and different from the public, from the voters. What is one of the key things that he said he wouldn't do? It was be different from the people he served. What's he all about? Public service. What's he all about? This service thing, country first. And then he has conversations about £20,000 to help his son study for his GCSEs because of a handful of very respectful journalists stood outside his house and asked him the odd question as he went to his car to go on the campaign trail.
By the way, just on journalists, I mean, there was a huge amount of hostility at the time to Boris Johnson. And do you remember when he was doorstepped? If you want to know how journalists behave outside top politicians' houses, perhaps think back to that moment where, to be fair, as a former journalist, he got it. Boris Johnson came out with trays of teas. It was after he resigned, I think, wasn't it? And everybody was outside his home. He came out with a couple of trays of teas. That's the atmosphere when we do a doorstep. It's not like the 1980s.
And also, Camilla, there are different types of doorsteps. If you're involved in a controversy and you're refusing to speak about something, then that might be a slightly more aggressive situation because you're not speaking about something that you should be speaking about. If you're a publicly paid official and you're not responding to perfectly reasonable questions, that might be a slightly more aggressive type of situation. But this is a totally benign situation. During an election campaign, there's an agreement about how these things are handled, and therefore it wouldn't be, what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do about that? It's not that type of atmosphere.
Are there shades of John Gummer feeding his child a burger during the BSE crisis? Just in terms of politicians bringing their family into the fray, using their family as a sort of human shield.
And also, I do not believe either that that was the only reason he used that £18 million penthouse.
We need to talk quickly about the art of the political apology. Kamal, why does Starmer find it so hard to say sorry? Should he be saying sorry both for winter fuel, as Susanna Reid demanded of him, and indeed Donagate? He was asked repeatedly on the broadcast round this morning, will you apologise? No. I mean, is it weak to apologise as a politician?
I think it just gives another boost to the news cycle.
Yeah.
What will be the lead in every single news organisation today and tomorrow? Starmer apologises for freebies. He has to be very careful. Do you remember, Camilla? We gave him some advice because he got himself trapped in the answering a journalist's question by using the question back to them. And it was, I can't remember what the subject was, but we said to him, Keir Starmer, you need to know the first rule of communication is don't let yourself be taken by the nose by the journalist asking you the question. He was very careful in all of his answers never to say sorry. I don't think an apology actually washes here. I think that Labour have resorted to sophistry on the actual rules. They've talked about transparency when they haven't been transparent. An apology might have sort of been an end point to this sort of round of the cycle, but I don't think it washes with the public if he says sorry. And also, frankly, Camilla, he's not sorry. It's very clear from his statements he's not sorry. So saying sorry, not sorry is not going to work in this situation because he doesn't think he's, clearly from what he's saying, he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. Do you think, Camilla, that if he had said sorry, given that, I don't think that would have been honest, but if he had said sorry, do you think that would have helped in this situation?
I just think it shows some humility. If he seems out of touch, I'm a sucker for an apology. I think when people say sorry,
if they mean it.
If they mean it, yeah. Not sorry if. Sorry if you've been offended by what I've said. If somebody says, look, trouble is, if he says sorry, it needs to be accompanied by a U-turn, particularly on winter fuel. Sorry, we've got this wrong.
They cannot apologise on winter fuel.
No, they can't do that.
Because they're not going to reverse it.
Okay, so on freebies.
Freebies, it would
sorry
be.
if it appears that I've been out of touch, but these are my justifications. I think
could have helped.
It could have helped. Well, should we talk about somebody who did make a full and frank apology? He said sorry. It didn't do him much good at the time. Phillip Schofield. He has recorded a series with Channel 5 called Cast Away, where he's been cast away on an island off the coast of Madagascar for 10 days. Let's have a listen to the trailer.
I've been cast away on a desert island. It's my chance to tell my side of my story. I know what I did was unwise, but is it enough to absolutely destroy someone?
So no food, no water, no shelter. We'll know how he gets on when Channel 5 release that series, but they've already filmed it, so he's been through that process. Camilla, you knew him, you worked with him, you've been in touch with him ever since. Talk us through a little bit about what that experience was like and just what your response was to... There seemed to be two camps, weren't there? That Phillip Schofield had acted wrongly by... He was obviously very famous, incredibly powerful within ITV as a character because of his great success. He had an affair with a young male, is what's called a runner, so quite low down on the pecking order in TV land. And that was seen as inappropriate. Possibly, some would argue, an abuse of power. But many people made clear, and he used the phrase unwise but not illegal, that he hadn't done anything which broke any laws. he doesn't appear to have done anything that actually broke any of the actual guidance within ITV itself. There was an inquiry that ITV held afterwards, and as you say, he left the programme. But what was your sense, Camilla, of those two sides of that argument?
Well, I've been appearing on This Morning since 2007. I first started going on there to talk about the royals, and then I still appear every week where I go through the newspapers one day a week with somebody like Giles Brandreth or Nick Ferrari or another journalist. So I know the people there well, and I knew and know Scof, as he's nicknamed, well. It's a funny one because I sometimes had a bit of a tricky relationship with Philip. For instance, I had written quite a lot of critical coverage of the Duchess of Sussex, and then when she did her Oprah interview and presented her truth, at the time, This Morning wanted to cover it. I had to appear the day after that primetime show kind of went live and captured. I had to appear on This Morning the morning after that show basically rocked the entire universe, seemingly. And he was quite aggressive in his questioning, and you've been very critical of her, and she says she's had mental health problems.
It was the racism, was it?
Yeah,
there
it was
as
the
well?
racism
The racism
stuff.
claim.
And I'd already been a target of a load
Yes.
of trolling, and let's be honest, it didn't make my life that much easier that week. Even though I sort of said on air, I think we just need to just take a step back and just see if any of this narrative slightly unravels in the coming days. And they'd sort of believed her narrative, and I was trying to provide a counter narrative. Well, that's her truth, but other people say something different. And so that was slightly awkward. And then what happened, and we're going to do a future Daily Tea on this, being cancelled and what it means for people. I'm pretty anti-cancellation. I think there is a distinction to be drawn if there are criminal charges involved. This whole situation, of course, was absolutely heartbreaking for Phillip Schofield's wife, Steph. And I felt, having known him, but not well, we're not, close mates or anything, but having worked with him as a colleague, I sort of, when he left This Morning, I was a bit worried about his mental health, and so kept in touch with him. And I think that everybody has the right to rehabilitate. In his case, he gave that really extensive interview to the BBC's Amal Rajan, where, as you say, he apologised. He apologised to his wife. He said it was unwise but not illegal. ITV took the decision they needed to take, but I think the impact of that on him is that he has been kind of completely cancelled. He was taken off the air, fair enough. Holly Willoughby subsequently left the show. The show is now being presented by two other people, Ben Shepherd and Kat Deely, and they're doing a really good job, along with Alison and Dermot. So great. But I suppose I look at that situation, I think, God, it must be really difficult to be somebody who was in the nation's living rooms, day in, day out. I mean, it was ubiquitous on telly, to suddenly just be expected to just go away forever. Like, what do you do in that situation? Some people might have not liked Phillip Schofield. Plenty of people didn't like him. Plenty of people liked him. I was always of the opinion that, like him or loathe him, did he deserve to be cancelled in the way he was? Does anyone deserve to be cancelled if they haven't actually done anything criminal? That's the question I was asking myself at the time. And it's a good thing that he's now doing this thing, because he had a period where he wasn't really doing anything at all. I just think you have to identify with somebody who... I just reflected on that whole thing and thought, goodness me, that can't have been easy. That was my opinion.
What will be fascinating will be to see his journey back and whether it works. Many, many different people have tried the kind of re-entry into public life. I think broadly, given that he then did go dark pretty much, in public terms, his socials stopped for over a year. He didn't do anything else. You wouldn't have seen anything of Phillip Schofield in the last 16 months since these events happened. That journey back, I think the public will have a degree of sympathy with him because he was so good at what he did. And I think sometimes that is undervalued. The talent to be able to be in people's living rooms, as you say, and hold their attention and bring a lot of joy to people. That idea of presenting with a smile, and it was all quite fun. He did do lots of serious interviews as well, but he was someone who was warm. What's the best route is always the question, isn't it, for people like Phillip Schofield, who clearly wants to get his career back on track. There's the I'm a celebrity route.
Yes.
Could he have done that? In PR terms,
not on ITV, no.
when you go down that route, you're not in control, are you? Although this seems to be quite a challenging environment, he is literally on his own. He is in control of everything he records, all the messages that are put together. There's no one challenging him on screen. It's under his control completely. So
quite a clever
it's
idea,
quite
really.
smart
Yeah.
for him to... And so all the edit and all the cuts and all the production that is now being done by Channel 5 for this programme, Phillip Schofield's going to be able to be involved in all of that. There's no live moment
He's
when
leaving
he's
himself
tackled.
He's laying himself very bare. It's
It is, yes. I think
he's going to be vulnerable.
in mental welfare terms, he's obviously as you say, making himself vulnerable. But when you're talking about a redemption story, he will look vulnerable. He will look as if he's in a tough position. So he's almost sort of accounting for himself by almost being... It's like being sort of... If you have done a crime, and of course Phillip Schofield hasn't done a crime, but he sent himself into exile.
Yes.
He's sort of got the exile period of time with no food, no water, no shelter. You've seen the pictures of him on the trailers, which if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see those. But he's got a beard and he looks rough and ready. Completely the opposite to the very clean-skinned, Clinique, cheekbones,
Yes.
beautifully kind of presented.
Silver fox.
Yeah, sort of ping on his teeth. Now he's going to be bearded, quite rough. But it's interesting that he'll be able to control the message in a way that, if you think of Matt Hancock, possibly
Do we have to think of Matt Hancock?
Maybe not. But he's possibly someone close to what Phillip Schofield went through, was discovered having an affair.
Yes.
I mean, actually, he's a paid-for
By the side
government
again.
minister. He's a paid-for government minister, so frankly, far worse, to be honest. And he was telling people to do things that he clearly, on closed-circuit TV, wasn't doing himself in terms of the closeness of his relationships with his own staff. Matt Hancock did SAS Who Dares Wins, but didn't come out of it that well because he looked a bit ridiculous.
Also, he was humiliated
Yes.
by the trainers, isn't it?
So he looked, because there was a third party who could sort of attack him. It was almost a public person. Whereas this is quite smart by Phillip Schofield. This is a very controlled environment.
I'm just thinking, it's the 3 R's, isn't it? It is, so how to be uncancelled, the 3 R's. Repentance, rehabilitation, redemption.
Beautiful 3 R's. I'd add a G to that. Genuine.
Yes.
He has to seem on the island, as he was with Amar Rajan. If you don't seem, horrible word, I know, authentic, the public can see straight through you. When they see Susanna Reid quizzing Keir Starmer on winter fuel allowance, when they see Nick Robinson quizzing Keir Starmer on freebies, they don't think they're watching someone giving genuine answers. They think they're watching someone giving a scripted answer that he's memorised.
That's right.
So as long as Phil Schofield comes across as genuine, I think the public will give him a chance. And it could be an interesting, uncancelled journey that is successful.
Now, on Keir Starmer, the Daily Tea newsletter this week will be asking you the question, does he deserve all this? Have we gone over the top? Does anyone want to speak in Starmer's defence in the face of a Daily Tea drubbing, let's be honest? If you do have an opinion on this, please do get in touch. I mean, you can give him a drubbing as well, but you can also speak in Starmer's support. It's thedailytea@telegraph.co.uk, and to subscribe to that Daily Tea newsletter, which is well worth doing because we give you all of the inside backstage goss at the Daily Tea, please go to telegraph.co.uk/Daily Tea newsletter.
And all those addresses, because sometimes they're quite hard to pick up when you're listening to something, maybe you're walking the dog, are in the show notes. So do have a look at those because all the addresses are in there.
Kamal, you're having a cheeky little day off tomorrow. I shall be back 5 p.m. with Tim Stanley.